Chapter 3. When we came in from afternoon recess, I saw a good surprise. A paper plate with an apple slice on each desk. Mrs. Nagel was probably trying to make up for how mean she'd been. I didn't think an apple slice was enough, but it was a start. But then I saw a bad surprise too. Zippy and Bump were lying in their cage, not moving. I had never seen this before. Then I remembered something. On Monday mornings, first thing, Mr. DeMatz picked a hamster helper for the week. The hamster helper's job was to give Zippy and Bump food and water right away, since on Fridays we were only left with them enough to last the weekend. Mr. DeMatz hadn't picked a hamster helper. Had forgotten about his promise to them, too. And now it was Monday afternoon. I ran over to the cage and filled their food tray and water bottle. I patted Zippy and Bump while they ate and told them how sorry I was that we forgot about them. They still seemed kind of skinny, so I got my apple slice and put it in their cage. "Clementine, you need to take your seat now," Mrs. Nagel yelled. Okay, fine. I guess she didn't yell it, but it made my ears hurt just the same. "And where is your science experiment?" "My science experiment?" "I left a slice of apple on each desk. We're going to do a science experiment with it. Yours is gone." "I thought it was a present," I explained. "I gave it to Zippy and Bump. They were almost dead because we hadn't fed them today." Mrs. Nagel was probably mad I'd thought of this good reason, because she said, "I'm sorry, there aren't any more apples. You'll have to look on with someone during the experiment." "She can have mine," Lily said. "She can have mine," Willie said at almost the same time. "She can have mine," Norris, Boris, Morris, Horace, Brontosaurus said. I guess the class was sick of Mrs. Nagel being mean to me because all of the kids offered me their apple slices. But Mrs. Nagel decided, no, it's fine, Clementine can watch the rest of us. So I did, and let me tell you, I did not miss out on anything. Leave a slice of apple out in the air, the apple turns brown because of oxidation. Big deal. Just before school ended, Principal Rice came back. She went over and whispered with the substitute for a minute. Then I saw her reach for the framed picture. I listened hard for the substitute to tell Mrs. Rice to go find her seats. But no, instead, the substitute just smiled. "My new nephew," I heard her sigh. "Isn't he a cutie?" I took out a marker. "No babies for me," I wrote on my arm. I like to write important reminders on my arm. That way I don't lose them. I always know where my arm is, which is not true about the pieces of paper. Plus, they look like tattoos. On Sunday nights, my mother scrubs all the week's notes off and I start over. This was a good one to start with. Mrs. Rice picked up a stack of papers and came to the front of the room. She didn't have to use any give me your attention hand claps because all the kids' eyes were pulled to her like magnets. I might go to principal school when I grow up so I can learn that trick. Mrs. Rice passed out the papers. My hand wanted to draw a picture on mine, but I told it to just wait. "You're each going to write a letter to the Adventures for Teachers judges," she said. "You're going to tell them why your teacher should win the trip. Take it with you tonight for homework. I'll come back tomorrow to collect them and send them in." Now, doesn't that sound like a good idea? All the kids pretended this sounded like a good idea except me, because it was not. A good idea is something like catching outlaws drinking beer in saloons, or a teacher sticking around to be your teacher if that's what he promised. On the way home, Margaret sat beside me as usual. I kept my face turned to the window, but Margaret doesn't like it when I don't look at her. She pinched me until I turned around. "What's the matter with your eyes?" she asked. "Have you been crying?" "No," I said. Then I turned back to the window. Margaret pinched me back to her again. "Okay, fine," I said. "Maybe I was a little in the girls' room." "How come?" she asked. So I told her about everything that had happened. He promised he'd be our teacher, and now he doesn't even care about that. If he wins, he'll be gone for the rest of the year. I was just getting the hang of third grade, and now I'll have to start all over. And Mrs. Nagel's really mean. I felt a poke in my neck and turned around. Mrs. Nagel isn't mean, Lily said. She's nice. Then she poked her brother and said, Willie, tell Clementine that Mrs. Nagel's not mean. Willie shrugged. She's not mean, he said. Which didn't count. Willie does everything Lily tells him to. Sometimes I wish I had a twin brother whose name rhymed with mine and who did everything I told him to. Instead, I have a brother who is only 3 years old and who does everything I tell him not to do. Plus, his name doesn't rhyme with mine, and it's not even a fruit name like I got stuck with, which reminded me. I got out a marker and wrote, "Collect more vegetable names for turnip," on my arm. Then I turned back to Willie and Lily. She's mean to me. I was in trouble all day. That's because you were doing things, Lily said. I didn't get in trouble today. I never get into any trouble. It was probably your own fault, Clementine, Margaret interrupted, although I was N-O-T, not talking to her. You were probably doing weird things. You're always doing weird things. Why don't you just watch Lily and copy her this week? That sounds like a dumb idea, I said. Willie poked my neck. It's what I do, he told me, and I never get into any trouble either. I slumped down into my seat. Okay, fine, I said. I'll do it.